Amanda and Charles Whitmore appeared to be the picture-perfect couple, polished, polite, and admired in their quiet suburban neighborhood. But when Amanda vanished just weeks after returning from a solo Miami vacation, investigators uncovered a twisted trail of betrayal, obsession, and a husband whose calm demeanor concealed a chilling secret. What began as a secret indulgence turned into a calculated nightmare, one that ended in murder, silence, and a horrifying truth buried beneath the surface of a flawless marriage. Amanda Whitmore had a life many envied. Her two-story colonial house stood proudly on a quiet street in Middleton, Wisconsin. A white picket fence outlined the perfect green lawn. Wind chimes dangled gently from the porch. Neighbors often watched as Amanda watered her rosebush every morning, always in the same pale blue robe, always with her blonde hair tied neatly. It was the kind of suburb where nothing ever changed, where the loudest sound on weekends was the hum of lawnmowers and kids playing a block away. She was married to Charles Whitmore, a respected dentist who ran a successful clinic just 15 minutes from home. Charles was meticulous in everything he did, from his work to the way he folded his clothes. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was reliable, calm, and provided Amanda with a stable life. They had been married for nearly 12 years, no children. That had once been a sore subject, but in time they both adjusted. Their lives settled into a routine. Wake up, breakfast, Charles to the clinic, Amanda to her yoga class. Dinner together, then silence as they scrolled through their phones in bed. It was peaceful, predictable, and slowly suffocating Amanda from the inside. She had stopped noticing it at first. The discontent arrived quietly, disguised as boredom. She began to feel like she was living the same day on repeat. Her friends, once close, had all drifted away after marriages, moves, and babies. Her phone was quiet most days. She filled her hours with errands, podcasts, and endless home improvement ideas she never finished. Charles rarely asked about her day. He never noticed the new perfume she tried or the subtle changes she made to her hair. He wasn't cruel, he just didn't see her anymore. On their 11th anniversary, they went out to dinner at a fancy steakhouse. Amanda wore a red dress she had bought just for the occasion. She spent 2 hours getting ready. Charles complimented the food, but not her. He talked about the clinic, about a new dental assistant who was slower than expected. Amanda smiled, nodded, and laughed in the right places. But inside, something cracked. That night, she stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering if the rest of her life would feel like slowly fading wallpaper in someone else's story. The idea of a vacation didn't start as an escape. It was supposed to be a reunion. Amanda reconnected with two friends from high school on Facebook, Tina and Janelle. They lived in different states now, had different lives, but they all shared the same sense of being lost. They decided to meet in Miami for a girls' getaway. 5 days, just fun, sun, and laughter. Charles didn't object. He even helped her pack. When Amanda landed in Miami, the warm air hit her like a wave of freedom. Palm trees, music, the scent of ocean breeze. It felt like stepping into a world where no one knew her name, where she wasn't anyone's wife or neighbor. She checked into a luxury hotel, slipped into a sundress, and joined her friends at the rooftop bar. Drinks flowed easily, strangers smiled. Music played loud enough to drown out old worries. For the first time in years, Amanda felt alive. She danced. She drank. She talked to men she would never speak to back home. Something inside her had changed, or maybe it had just been buried too long. By the second night, Amanda had crossed a line. She met a man named Marcus at the hotel pool. Tall, charming, with a deep laugh that made her feel 17 again. One drink turned into two. And by midnight, Amanda had done something she had never imagined herself doing. The guilt came the next morning, sharp and sour. She told herself it was a mistake, that it would never happen again, but something had awakened. Each day brought someone new. A name she didn't need to remember. A face she wouldn't see again. She kept a diary on her phone, hidden inside a generic health app, recording each moment in coded language that only she understood. She told herself it was temporary, that no one would ever know, that this was just her moment of madness before returning to her quiet life. By the 5th day, Amanda had been with 12 different men, each encounter impulsive, reckless, and wrapped in secrecy. She had become someone she didn't recognize, someone she wasn't sure she wanted to be, but couldn't stop becoming. When the trip ended, Amanda boarded her flight home with a heavy mix of shame and adrenaline still in her blood. She stared out the window the entire flight, wondering what she had done and why she didn't feel as guilty as she thought she should. Back in Wisconsin, the cold air greeted her. So did Charles, waiting patiently at the airport with a smile. He kissed her cheek and took her bags without question. At home, everything was exactly the same. The roses still bloomed. The house still smelled like vanilla candles, but Amanda was different. She was carrying a storm inside her. She told herself she could move on, that Miami didn't count, that secrets could be buried just like old photo albums. But the truth was, her secret had weight. It pulled on her with every glance from Charles, every moment of silence at dinner, every night they went to bed without touching. And then Charles noticed something, a shift, a distance. Something he couldn't name at first but could feel in the air, like the tension before a storm. He began to watch her closely. He began to question things she said. And one night, when Amanda left her phone charging in the kitchen, he made a decision that would change everything. Amanda was asleep upstairs. The house was dark and still. Charles unlocked the phone, driven by something he didn't understand, maybe suspicion, maybe fear. He searched. And what he found inside that seemingly ordinary health app stopped his heart. It was all there. The names. The dates. The coded words that didn't need translation. He read every line in silence, his face expressionless, his hands steady. He didn't wake her. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just printed everything. The next morning, Amanda smiled at him over breakfast. She asked about his day ahead. He told her about a new patient who needed root canal surgery. She laughed at a joke he made about dental insurance. She didn't see the way he looked at her. She didn't notice the way his eyes no longer held warmth. She had no idea that her secret wasn't just exposed, it had started something. Something quiet, dangerous, and irreversible. Amanda tried to resume her normal life after returning from Miami, but everything felt different. The quiet of her home, once comforting, now felt hollow. The digital diary she kept, disguised inside a health tracker app, became her obsession. She reread the entries every day, not just to relive what had happened, but to remind herself that it was real. He watched Amanda more closely, studied her expressions, asked seemingly harmless questions about her trip. But there was no confrontation, no accusation. Amanda assumed everything was fine. She believed the illusion was holding, that she had stepped outside her life, tasted something forbidden, and survived it. Or at least she thought she had. When the house was silent and the lights were off, he crept into the kitchen and took her phone. By the time Amanda woke up, Charles had already printed every page and hid the phone back where he found it. He wasn't angry in the way people might expect. He didn't scream or break things. Instead, he became cold, his emotions locked away, his thoughts focused only on what to do next. At first they were harmless, a single emoji, a vague compliment. She assumed one of the men from Miami had found her online, though she didn't know how. She told herself it was just a scare tactic, someone bluffing, but her fear grew. She began looking over her shoulder in grocery stores. She deleted more entries. There was no confrontation, no questions, just his cold eyes following her every move. Amanda didn't know it yet, but Charles wasn't waiting to catch her. He already had all the evidence he needed. He was just waiting for the perfect moment to act. She even considered going to the police, but how could she explain the situation without exposing herself? Then a message arrived that simply read, "Do your neighbors know?" Annotated in red ink, with notes and markings she didn't recognize. Some pages had one word written in capital letters, slut. Others had arrows pointing to the names she had written down, as if someone was trying to connect the dots. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. She didn't respond, but more messages came, teasing, hinting, threatening. Amanda lived in fear of a shadow she couldn't identify. Charles, calculating and composed, continued to build his plan. He wasn't interested in divorce courts or public humiliation. He wanted finality. And as Amanda tried to clean up her past, she never noticed how close danger had already come. That night, she packed a suitcase and drove to a motel outside of town. She didn't tell Charles. She didn't answer his calls. She sat in a dark room, watching the door, waiting for something to happen. She changed her number, but the messages resumed days later from a new one. Someone had accessed her secrets. Divorce wasn't enough. Humiliation wouldn't satisfy him. In his mind, Amanda had committed something worse than betrayal. She had broken the image he had spent years maintaining. To him, she hadn't just cheated. She had destroyed the story of their life. He had noticed the health app she opened often, and curiosity pushed him to try her usual password. It worked. What he found inside stunned him. Dozens of entries, written like journal confessions. Graphic details, timestamps, locations. Amanda had written everything. She hadn't even tried to hide her satisfaction. The routines she used to follow without question suddenly became unbearable. She had used fake names for the men she met. He even began following Amanda discreetly, watching her movements, noting who she spoke to and where she went. Though Amanda had returned to the house, Charles believed part of her had never come back. And the part that did? He no longer trusted her with it. There were no pictures, no texts, nothing that could be traced. She had been careful, or so she believed. She couldn't shake the feeling of danger following her like an invisible thread tugging at the corners of her life. She became jumpy, paranoid. She thought maybe she had left some trace behind. She even went back into the diary one day and deleted 2 of the entries. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. The diary was the only evidence, and even that was hidden behind 2 layers of password protection. She thought of deleting it more than once, but couldn't bring herself to do it. That digital archive was all she had left of her week of freedom. Folding laundry, organizing the pantry, cleaning the guest bathroom, none of it distracted her the way it used to. Her mind kept drifting back to the warm nights in Miami, the laughter, the risk, the sense of being wanted. Each memory lingered like perfume on skin, refusing to fade. She started sleeping in later, skipping her yoga classes, and spending hours staring at her phone. Amanda convinced herself that what happened in Miami would stay locked away forever. Meanwhile, Charles began changing too, but in subtle ways Amanda failed to notice. He started coming home from work a little earlier. He no longer left his phone unattended. One evening, as Amanda was brushing her hair in the bathroom, she noticed her phone wasn't where she left it. She searched the kitchen, the bedroom, the couch. It was plugged back into its charger, but she was sure it hadn't been there a few minutes earlier. A strange unease settled in her stomach, but she told herself it was nothing. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she had misplaced it without realizing. But Charles had seen enough. 2 nights earlier, he had stayed up after Amanda went to bed, pretending to read in the living room. He didn't stop reading until morning. Charles began documenting everything. He photographed the pages he printed. He backed up the entries. Amanda, oblivious to his discovery, continued pretending that nothing had happened. But part of her had changed too. Around this time, Amanda began receiving strange text messages from an unknown number. She didn't tell Charles. She feared what it might reveal. One day, she found a manila envelope on her car windshield. Inside were printed copies of her diary entries. Every one of them, Amanda fell apart. She raced home and locked herself in the bedroom, sobbing uncontrollably. She knew someone was watching her. Someone wanted her to suffer. When she returned 2 days later, she found Charles sitting calmly at the dining table, sipping coffee. He welcomed her home like nothing had happened. By now, the tension inside the house was unbearable. Amanda's days began to unravel like a thread slowly pulled from a sweater unnoticed at first. But then everything started falling apart. She went through the motions of her life in a fog. She still smiled at the neighbors when she walked outside. She still bought groceries, watered the plants, and answered emails. But her eyes looked different. Her smiles felt forced. The confident woman who had once wandered the sunlit streets of Miami was now living in fear, watching shadows and jumping at every sound. Her anxiety had taken over. Charles, on the other hand, maintained his calm exterior. He still left for work at the same time each morning, dressed in the same crisp button-down shirts. His routines remained unchanged. To anyone observing from the outside, nothing about Charles Whitmore appeared different. But inside he was a man carrying quiet rage. The betrayal had carved something dark inside him, something deeper than anger. He didn't shout, he didn't cry, and he didn't beg for explanations. Instead, he calculated. Every move, every word, every glance he gave Amanda was intentional. He watched her the way a hunter watches his prey patiently. The printed diary pages remained hidden in a locked box beneath a false floorboard in the garage. Charles checked it every night after Amanda went to sleep. It wasn't just evidence to him. It had become an obsession. He read them over and over, trying to understand who his wife had become. The woman he thought he knew had been replaced by someone else entirely. And that someone had mocked the very life he had built? Amanda started having nightmares. She woke up drenched in sweat, gasping, convinced someone was in the room. The anonymous messages had stopped, but the silence was worse. Now she didn't know when or how the next blow would come. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Her phone stayed clutched in her hand even while she slept. She began keeping a kitchen knife hidden under her side of the bed. Every creak in the house made her heart race. Then, one morning, she found something that confirmed her worst fears. She was going through the laundry basket in the guest room when she noticed a folded piece of paper inside one of her socks. It was a copy of one of the diary entries, her most explicit one highlighted and underlined. No words were written on the paper, no threats. Just the page placed where only she would find it. Her legs went weak. She sat down on the floor, dizzy. Someone had been in her things. Someone wanted her to know they had access to her world. Amanda didn't know who to trust. She no longer suspected a stranger. The paper was planted too carefully, too intimately. It had to be someone close. But she couldn't bring herself to believe Charles would do something like this. He was distant lately, yes, but not confrontational. He hadn't said anything, hadn't accused her, hadn't even changed his behavior in any way that would suggest he knew. But Charles knew. And he was waiting. That night, Amanda decided to leave. She told herself it was temporary, just a break, somewhere to think. She waited until Charles fell asleep, then packed a duffel bag quietly and slipped out the front door. She drove 3 hours north to a small Airbnb cabin she found online. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just needed space to breathe, to figure out what was happening and who was doing this to her. Charles woke up to an empty bed, but he didn't panic. He already knew where she had gone. He had tracked her computer's browser history the night before. He knew about the Airbnb. He even had the address written down in his notebook. But he didn't follow her, not yet. He used her absence to his advantage. While Amanda was away, Charles entered full control mode. He printed out financial records, pulled her credit card statements, and scanned her personal journals. He even accessed her cloud storage, finding backups of deleted entries she thought were gone forever. Every piece of information he uncovered fueled his resolve. He wasn't trying to understand her anymore. He was preparing for the end. Back at the cabin, Amanda started to feel normal again. The silence of the woods helped quiet her mind. She spent time writing, walking trails, drinking wine on the porch. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't jumping at every sound. She started to believe that maybe she was overreacting, that maybe the pressure and guilt had distorted her thinking. She even drafted a long message to Charles, apologizing for her distance, for her mistakes. She saved it in her notes, not ready to send it. On the fourth night, she went into town for dinner. When she returned, she noticed something strange. The lock on the front door didn't feel right. It turned too easily. She stepped inside and felt a chill. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. She walked through the room slowly. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken. But on the kitchen counter was another printed page from her diary, one she had never printed herself. It was folded neatly, placed next to a bottle of wine she had brought from home. Her name was underlined in red. At the bottom, in bold black marker, one word was written, "Whore." Amanda collapsed into a chair, her whole body shaking. She couldn't breathe. Someone had followed her. Someone had been in the cabin. She grabbed her bag and ran outside. She sat in her car with the doors locked, staring at the cabin in terror, waiting for anything to move. The next morning, she drove back home without looking back. She didn't call the police. She didn't tell Charles. She didn't know who she could trust anymore. She only knew one thing: she wasn't safe. When she arrived home, Charles welcomed her with a soft smile and a kiss on the forehead. He told her he had missed her. He said the house felt too quiet without her. Amanda stared at him, trying to read his face, searching for any sign of guilt or cruelty. But his eyes gave nothing away. He poured her a glass of wine, her favorite kind. They sat together on the couch that evening and watched television like nothing had happened. But Amanda knew the truth. She was being hunted by someone who knew her every secret, someone who was close. And Charles, silent and composed, sat beside her with a calm that terrified her more than any stranger ever could. She was no longer living in a marriage. She was living in a trap. Amanda stopped sleeping through the night. Each time she closed her eyes, she dreamed of faceless men watching her from the shadows. She started locking the bedroom door while Charles was in the shower. She began using cash instead of cards. She turned off location services on her phone. It was a sign that something had been decided. The messages, the threats, the silence, they had been steps in a process. And now that process was nearly complete. She'd wait until he left, then leave behind everything. She'd drive her car to a park, abandon it, and take a pre-booked bus under a fake name. She even bought a wig. It felt ridiculous at first, but every part of her screamed that it was necessary. Amanda reluctantly agreed. They ordered pizza. They sat under a shared blanket on the couch. Charles leaned over and rested his head against hers. He dressed in his golf polo, kissed her on the cheek, and left. Amanda waited 15 minutes to be sure. Then she showered quickly, dressed, and grabbed her bag. As she stepped outside, the sunlight felt blinding. Every step down the driveway felt like she was walking through molasses. He showed them the printed diary entries, but only the ones that made Amanda look unstable. A husband who had tried to help but was left behind. News stations aired a few brief segments, but there was no new information. Even her friends eventually believed the version Charles gave, that Amanda had snapped under pressure, run off to escape her shame. And with no body, no sign of struggle, no witnesses, police treated it as a voluntary disappearance. He left out the parts about the tracking, the threats, the planted pages. When she parked the car and walked into the woods, duffel bag over her shoulder, Charles waited. He gave her 10 minutes, then he followed. Quiet, focused, cold. When he found her by the edge of a ravine, Amanda didn't even scream. Inside were the diary pages, photographs, maps, and a full timeline of Amanda's movements. Months later, a dry summer caused the creek near the ravine to recede. The husband the town had once respected was now labeled a cold-blooded killer. But beneath the scandal, the betrayal, and the death was a far deeper truth, one about appearances, control, and the terrifying consequences of secrets left to rot behind closed doors. Charles never confessed. He never gave police the full details of what happened in the woods. He just sat silently in court as evidence was read aloud. Not once did he show remorse. A hiker, walking his dog off trail, stumbled upon what looked like plastic sheeting caught under tree roots. The scent led them to a shallow grave. She just stared at him with the hollow eyes of someone who finally understood she'd never been in control. The plastic had matched a specific type sold only in a handful of hardware stores. Investigators traced one purchase back to a store in Middleton, paid for in cash. Security footage revealed a man face partially hidden, but build and posture unmistakable. He told them she had been acting erratically, sleeping with strangers, and possibly meeting one of them again. He handed over her computer history, her burner phone receipts, even the fake name she used to buy the bus ticket. He showed up at the clinic the next day. He smiled at patients. He went to lunch with coworkers. In public, he played the grieving husband perfectly. But she made it to the car. She started the engine. She was so close to freedom she could taste it. Amanda forced herself to smile. She couldn't risk letting him know what she had planned. That night, while he slept, she repacked her duffel bag and double-checked every step of her exit. She didn't sleep at all. Her car was found parked at the edge of a nature reserve, engine off, doors locked. Her bag was gone. Her phone was missing. No one had seen her arrive. A hiker found the vehicle around dusk and reported it. Police were notified. Charles played his role with heartbreaking precision. Her life became a routine of fear management. Every sound in the house felt amplified. Every glance from Charles was examined like a riddle. She spent the morning researching how to create a new identity. But Charles had installed silent tracking software months ago, and everything she typed was sent to his private server. He watched her plan every step. He let her think she had control. He waited, calm and patient. She read stories of women who had done it before, victims of violence, abuse, surveillance. She made a list: cash, prepaid phone, burner laptop, transportation without ID. It felt like preparing for war. She started tracking his behavior the way he had once tracked hers: when he left the house, what time he returned, what room he spent the most time in. But unlike Amanda, Charles never slipped. He had returned to his old routines, treating her as if nothing had ever gone wrong between them. He complimented her new dress, offered to cook dinner, even brought home flowers one afternoon. But Amanda no longer believed the performance. She was sure he knew. And if he knew, then every kind word was part of a script. A delay. A warning before the storm. The printed pages had stopped appearing, but Amanda believed that wasn't a sign of mercy. One day, Amanda decided to disappear, not just leave the house, but erase herself entirely. She picked a date, a Sunday. Charles always left early to meet his golf friends, but Charles had already found her plan. She had used her personal laptop to search for escape routes, believing he no longer had access to her online history. On the Saturday night before her escape, Charles suggested a movie night. Sunday morning arrived. Charles woke early, just like she expected. She never noticed the small device stuck underneath the rear bumper and AirTag, hidden by Charles weeks ago. Hours later, Amanda never made it to the bus station. He told officers Amanda had seemed distant lately, that she had mentioned needing time away, that she struggled with anxiety and had talked about disappearing. The narrative was clean. A woman crumbling under the weight of her own guilt. 2 weeks passed. Amanda's case was pushed lower and lower on the priority list. The missing persons posters faded in the summer heat, but Charles knew where she was. He had followed her that Sunday, staying just far enough behind to avoid suspicion. What happened next was quick, quiet, efficient. Amanda never left that forest. Charles returned home without leaving a trace. He disposed of her belongings, wiped her digital trail, and resumed his life. But nature had a way of revealing secrets. Amanda's body was discovered half-buried, wrapped tight, with remnants of the duffel bag still nearby. Police reopened the case immediately. Autopsy results confirmed suffocation. Charles Whitmore was arrested at his clinic 2 days later without resistance. His home was searched. The hidden lockbox in the garage was discovered. The truth was undeniable. What had started as infidelity had become a calculated execution. Not a crime of passion, but a planned erasure. Amanda's story shocked the community. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood up and read the verdict. Charles Whitmore, once the most respected man on his quiet suburban street, was found guilty of first-degree murder. Amanda's murder. The cameras captured his face expressionless, unreadable. He showed no emotion. Not a flicker of regret, not even a sigh. He stood tall, dressed in the same gray suit he had worn every day of the trial, as if still trying to project an image of control. But the world saw him now for what he truly was, a husband who had killed in cold blood. A man who chose murder over mercy, silence over divorce. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Amanda's story had spread far beyond Middleton. The scandal, the diary, the staged disappearance, it had all turned into a national fascination. Headlines flashed across every news outlet. Podcasts dissected every detail. Online sleuths debated whether Amanda had deserved sympathy or scorn. But among all the noise, the fact remained. A woman had died. A man had buried her in the woods like a piece of trash. And for months, he had played the grieving husband while her body decayed in a shallow grave. Charles was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, he said nothing, no apology, no explanation. His silence echoed louder than any outburst. The courtroom watched him being led away, shackled, the final chapter in a story that still didn't feel fully closed. Amanda's remains were buried properly days later in a quiet cemetery surrounded by weeping willows. A small crowd gathered, just a few friends, a couple of cousins, and one or two people from her yoga class. Her parents had passed years before. She had no siblings. The service was brief. A priest read from a passage Amanda used to keep in a journal as a teenager, back when she still believed in fairy tales and true love. No one said her name out loud for very long. There was a collective discomfort around it now, as if Amanda had become more myth than memory. But Amanda's story didn't end with the verdict. A month after the sentencing, a woman named Lena Walker came forward. She had recognized Amanda from the news coverage. Lena had met Amanda briefly in Miami at a beach bar on the second night of her trip. They weren't close, just casual small talk over cocktails, but Lena remembered Amanda's energy, her nervous laugh, the way she seemed to be running from something. Lena hadn't thought much of it until she saw Amanda's face again on TV. Something had been nagging her ever since. Something Amanda had mentioned in passing during their short conversation. Lena contacted the police and offered her phone for review. She hadn't deleted her photos from that night in Miami. There, in the background of one of the selfies, was Amanda. Sitting at the bar, next to her was a man. He was facing away, but the shape of his head, the curve of his shoulders, it was unmistakable. Charles Whitmore. Investigators analyzed the image. They enhanced it, matched body measurements, compared timestamps and flight records. The chilling truth came into focus. Charles had been in Miami at the same time Amanda was. He had followed her, quietly, secretly. Before he ever confronted her, before she ever returned home, he had already been watching. Already planning. The timeline shifted. The original belief was that Charles discovered Amanda's diary after her return. But now, with this new evidence, it was clear he had known much earlier. Possibly even before she boarded the plane. He had accessed her accounts, tracked her location, witnessed everything. And rather than confront her in the moment, he had chosen something more sinister. He had let her play out her fantasy, collecting every detail like a hunter marking a trail, so he could later use it against her. The media exploded again. The revelation that Charles had stalked Amanda to Miami added a new layer of horror to the story. This wasn't just a husband betrayed. It was a man obsessed with control, willing to cross state lines and stalk his wife in secret, just to construct a narrative of ultimate punishment. He had let her feel free only to destroy her completely when she least expected it. The state considered new charges but ultimately decided the life sentence was sufficient. Charles was already locked away forever, but for Amanda's friends it mattered. It proved she hadn't been reckless just for the thrill. She had been manipulated from the start, trapped in a cage she couldn't see. Even when she ran, she was already caught. Amanda's story soon became the subject of a documentary. It wasn't sensationalized, it was told carefully, chronologically, using court transcripts, interviews and surveillance footage. Her diary entries were narrated softly, as journal reflections of a woman desperate for something real. The producers wanted to restore some dignity to Amanda's name, to show the world that she wasn't just a headline or a scandal. She was a woman who felt invisible, who made mistakes, who tried to reclaim something of herself, and who paid for it with her life. In the final moments of the film, a montage played, Amanda as a young woman on her wedding day, Amanda laughing with her friends on the beach, Amanda walking alone on a suburban street with wind in her hair. No narration, just music, just silence. The documentary sparked national conversations about emotional abuse, digital surveillance, and the line between private pain and public judgment. Amanda's story was taught in some criminal justice classes as a case study in premeditated domestic homicide. True crime fans dissected it online. But her name remained a cautionary whisper in quiet neighborhoods, the kind where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Back in Middleton, the Whitmore house was sold. The new owners gutted the interior, tearing out the kitchen cabinets, the bedroom wallpaper, even the garage floor. One of the workers claimed he found a box buried behind the water heater filled with printed photos, maps, and a journal written by Charles in code. If true, it was never confirmed. The box vanished before police could examine it. Charles remains in prison to this day. He hasn't spoken publicly, hasn't given interviews, hasn't responded to letters. He spends most of his time in the prison library. According to a guard, he reads medical textbooks and writes in longhand on yellow legal pads. He never talks about Amanda. But Amanda is not forgotten. Her diary, once hidden away in a fake app, was eventually published online in full with her family's blessing. It serves as a stark, raw reminder of how easily freedom can be mistaken for safety, and how love in the wrong hands can turn into something far more terrifying than hate. In the end, Amanda never saw the danger coming, not because she was naive, but because she believed her greatest mistake was a secret she could carry. She didn't realize that her every step had already been turned into a trap. A performance, carefully constructed by someone who valued reputation more than human life. And when the mask fell away, it revealed not just a murderer, but the true face of control.